No, what does Venezuela have, Shahid, that makes us want to get involved? Because we know it's got to be something in it for us. We don't really care about humanity or, people's rights around the globe, right?
Indeed. Yeah, if we were particularly concerned about humanitarian crises, you might think that we take a different line, for instance, towards supporting the Saudi invasion of Yemen, where there is actually a legitimate humanitarian crisis that has been unfolding for years. In Venezuela, our interests, I could sum them up in a single word with 3 letters: oil.
Ladies and gentlemen, this show is brought to you by justinformed.com, a social media site that doesn't steal your data. It never sells your privacy. None of that fishy stuff that you get on other social media platforms. It's founded by activists, not corporatists. Join us at justinformed.com and tell them that Tim Black sent you. The show is also brought to you by TimBlackTV.com. Independent media done right. News for people who can't stand the news. And I'm your host, and let's do this. Welcome to the Tim Black at Night Show. Glad you all can join me. My folks on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Roku. What's up, Roku? How y'all feeling? Wow, guys, I got to tell you, I'm very excited about tonight's show. One, because the topics that we cover are not topics that you can get everywhere, which is the reason why you do this show, because you feel like you actually contribute to conversations that matter to the world, right? So I'm pumped up about that. Hell yeah. I'm also very pumped up about the guest that I have tonight, Holly Hood. She's an urban libertarian and a political radio host. She's joining us tonight. Also, we have Robbie Martin, co-host of the Media Roots radio podcast and a documentary filmmaker too. That's right. Also, Shahid Buttar, a constitutional lawyer and a political activist. Folks, give it up for my panel. All right, guys. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. You guys could be putting out fires, fighting the power, or something else. I'm glad you joined me tonight. How you feeling? Let me start with Holly. How are you, Holly?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me here. Got to bring the hood everywhere I go,
That's it. If it ain't in the hood, it ain't good. Thank you, Holly, for joining us. Robbie, what up, my brother? How you feeling, Robbie?
I'm feeling great, man. Thank you for having me on.
Man, thank you, man. Robbie's out in California, man. I forget there are people on different time zones. Robbie's got the beard. I'm jealous, and so does my next guest, Shahid Buttar. What's up, man? Glad to see you again.
It's great to see you too. Always exciting to be with you.
Man, we are going to do this, man. And Shahid is also in Cali, right, Shahid?
I am, yeah. I'm in San Francisco. I think probably just across the bay from Robbie.
That's what's up. And Holly's right here in my hood and neck of the woods. Give it up for that. Booyah. So, guys, the topics for tonight, I'd love to open the conversation up with none other than Venezuela. I have a clip I'd like to share with everyone. Panel, you won't be able to see the clip, but you will be able to hear it. It's going to give a little background to the viewers about Venezuela for those who need to get caught up on it, and we're going to start with that.
He's announced his support for opposition leader Juan Guaidó, who has declared himself the country's interim president. That led the embattled president, Nicolás Maduro, to demand all U.S. diplomats leave within 72 hours. The U.S. is telling those diplomats to stay there, as thousands of Venezuelans take to the streets to demand Maduro step down. State Department reporter Cristina Ruffini joined me earlier to break it all down.
Well, so the National Assembly is basically the only democratic institution left in the country. And Guaidó is the head of the National Assembly, and there have been, months and months of protests. It really came to a frenzy yesterday where he kind of stood up and swore himself in and said, I am the representative of the people, raise your hand, swear yourselves in with me, to protect our country and go forward until we can get democracy in Venezuela. So after he did that, then you had countries kind of jumping on board or not jumping on board and saying, yeah, we're supporting this guy. And that's a really big deal to support someone who's not technically the head of a state. So, we'll have to see if it fuels a revolution or if it spawns more of a crackdown by Maduro and his army, which he still controls up until now.
And we just saw the clip, and we know where we are. We know that there is a fight for power in Venezuela. Can I start with Robbie? I saw that Robbie had a spirited conversation about it on his timeline. Robbie, what the hell is going on in Venezuela, and why are the U.S. and Trump sticking their nose in Venezuelan business?
Well, I mean, it's been happening for a while, Tim. Like, I would say since John Bolton especially got into the Trump administration, he established what he calls the troika of tyranny, which is reminiscent of the axis of evil during the Bush administration, a term coined by David Frum. And what he's referring to is sort of these outlier anti-American imperialism South American countries, and including also Cuba. And Venezuela was sort of in that troika of tyranny phrase that John Bolton was using. And I saw a bizarre thing happen a couple of weeks ago, and I was discussing this with you before we got started here, where someone actually tried to edit the Wikipedia page for Venezuela to say that this opposition leader was actually the president and not Maduro. And I thought that was interesting because, you know, we've been seeing a lot of coup attempts against Maduro that have evidence that connects them to the United States government. But, you know, for example, the apparent explosive attack on Maduro that involved that drone, I think that was about 6 months ago now. Maduro directly fingered the United States and the CIA as being behind that, and meeting with coup plotters, actually sending U.S. Government officials to meet with opposition coup plotters in Venezuela. So it seems really heavy-handed and dumb, Tim, if this is, you know, the Trump administration trying to actually finalize these coup attempts. But that's what it appears, is that it's a really dumb, ham-fisted maneuver, which is basically to officially declare, you know, with Trump's Twitter account, I think they even released a statement from the White House officially declaring the opposition leader in Venezuela the official president and not the elected president, Maduro. So that's currently what has happened. And it appears to be, you know, we haven't seen exactly how it's going to play out, but Maduro is basically saying all U.S. diplomats need to leave the country. And he's pushing back really hard on this. And it seems like a real coup in the making that's happening right now, where they might even, you know, who knows if the Trump administration will jump in at some point and actually militarily support this coup. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But it's a lot of bizarre regime change like activity in the middle of Trump saying that he's going to end all the wars and pull us out of Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Let me read that Donald Trump tweet, guys, just to highlight what Robbie was pointing out. The citizens of Venezuela have suffered far too long at the hands of the illegitimate Maduro regime. Today have officially recognized the president of the Venezuelan National Assembly, Juan Guaidó, as the interim president of Venezuela. Wow. So what do we have? No, what does Venezuela have, Shahid, that makes us want to get involved? Because we know it's got to be something in it for us. We don't really care about humanity or, you know, people's rights around the globe, right?
Indeed. Yeah, if we were particularly concerned about humanitarian crises, you might think that we take a different line, for instance, towards supporting the Saudi invasion of Yemen, where there is actually a legitimate humanitarian crisis that has been unfolding for years. In Venezuela, our interests, I could sum them up in a single word with 3 letters: oil. It's one of the largest petroleum producers in the world. And it's interesting to think about the current events in the context of the longer running history. It's always important to zoom back beyond the news cycle to consider what created the current conditions. It was about 15 years ago that the United States did essentially support a coup in Venezuela that was ultimately unwound. And at the time, the constitution that we forced on the country, its very first provision was to essentially privatize the oil resources that before were not as available to foreign corporations to extract. And if you look at the history of U.S. intervention in Latin America, if we were to list all the countries that the United States has militarily intervened in to remove leaders that we didn't like, I mean, we could spend the rest of the broadcast just naming them, just a few to give your listeners a sense of how long running this history is. Guatemala, Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, Grenada, Panama, all these are Chile in 1973, where the CIA was directly involved in a coup deposing a democratically elected government who was resisting corporate resource extraction by U.S. corporations. We have a tried and true and consistent line in Latin America, and democracy and human rights have never been in front for the United States. Our foreign policy towards Latin America has consistently degraded human rights for at least the last 70 years. And that nothing has changed today, certainly. The last thing I'd maybe say before I turn it back to you is that anytime you see the corporate political parties in Washington marching in lockstep, you can be assured that there is something shady afoot. And whether you look at this through the lens of Eisenhower's warning about a military-industrial complex contriving our foreign policy, whether you look at this through the lens of corporate resource extraction, exacerbating the climate crisis, or whether you look at this through the lens of human rights that are opportunistically cited as a basis for empire promoting intervention. And through any of these lenses, the American position on Venezuela appears to be just what it is, which is to say the corrupt machinations of a tyrant.
Chop it up. Well, Holly, I know you're a libertarian, Holly. What's the libertarian perspective on us sticking our nose in Venezuela? And it seems like we love to do that in Latin America. Then we turn around and say, well, why are these people trying to come flee their country? I don't know what happened. What's your thoughts, Holly?
Exactly. See, as a libertarian, we don't get too much into foreign policies. We believe in, not being in other people's business. We need to be minding our own, especially now with the government shutdown and everything that's going on. We really need to focus on domestic policies right now. But we do know that, the foreign policies do bleed into the domestic policies. We live in a capital society. We understand when you see America go to other countries, they're doing it to have presence there, so they can, assert, their power as America. And right now we're seeing that again in Venezuela. And just to piggyback on what Shahid said, it is the oil. We all know it's the oil. We all know our commander-in-chief is a businessman. So we have to understand that, this is all another business move to me. And I'll tell you one thing about the Venezuelans. They really protest, okay? I don't know what we think that we're doing in America, but they're really protesting. Like, they're really out there by the thousands, throwing bottles. Like, they're really, trying to stand up. Here, we just kind of march and, kind of make it look good for TV. But I got to give it up to Venezuelans. They really want to, show their presence.
Yeah. Give it up for that, too. Yeah, it seemed like our protests are more about taking selfies and saying we did stuff and tagging each other, on the app or whatever, but not so much about the change. I'm wondering, guys, it seems like that we talked about, Robbie and I talked about this before the show, the Trump supporters, there's a segment, and I know the media overplays it, makes it seem like there's a whole bunch of Bernie people that went and voted Trump. But for the ones that did, because there are a couple, whether they did it for real reasons or fake reasons or monetary reasons there, Robbie, I wonder how they're going to, ethically feel okay about the fact that Trump's basically doing what Obama did.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the answer to that could be found in the fact that Venezuela happens to be a socialist country. Maybe not completely socialist. There's some argument to be made about exactly what kind of government they run. But I think that there's not much sympathy to be gained from just the general right in terms of, anti-war sentiment and wanting to respect the sovereignty of Venezuela. And I would argue that there really wasn't much either for North Korea before sort of the peacemaking process sort of got started between the North and South Korean. So I think that has something to do with it. I think because Venezuela is socialist, you're not really going to see a lot of these people on the right who are Trump supporters who actually want him to end the wars, being that bothered by them supporting a coup in Venezuela. Now, if Trump moves to doing something like a Operation Just Cause, George H.W. Bush Sr. style thing like he did in Panama, and sends in a military force to actually finalize a coup or something like that, then we might see people react differently. But I've seen just bizarre rationalizations already from people like that guy Jack Posobiec, for example, saying that, well, China is actually a threat in South America and they're taking over South America, so that's why Trump is pushing on South America. So there's all these rationalizations I'm already seeing. But, I've seen libertarians who have been fairly good on this already, who probably personally hate socialism themselves, but they understand that the principled stand to take is against the U.S. meddling in Venezuela with their elected, government. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking at some of the channel on Twitter about it, and yeah, it's kind of quiet. Like there's not much talk about it. I don't know, Shahid. Have you heard many other outlets discussing Venezuela at any length at all the last couple of days?
I mean, most of what you see on the media about Venezuela is repeating government talking points, and quite frankly, what you're observing here, I think, is a broader crisis that indicates more about journalism than it does about Venezuela, which is simply that, you know, what passes for the free press in the United States has increasingly been reduced to stenography. And you see this particularly in the reporting on the president. You know, most of what comes out of the White House are lies, and you still have major press outlets that report on it as if there was any modicum of reliability in the president's statements. One of the unfortunate aspects of the crisis in Venezuela is that the corporate political parties are coalescing around the president's stance, and not just within the United States, but even abroad. You know, I take some alarm at the Latin American governments. Brazil comes to mind in particular, that have followed Trump's lead in recognizing the opposition leader as the now legitimate head of state of the country. You know, Brazil, of course, recently fell to fascism through an election in the last few months, and what we're witnessing in Venezuela is the attempt to impose it through a coup. And at the end of the day, I haven't heard a great deal of media discussion that pays anything much more than lip service to the current crisis, and I haven't heard any that get into the roots of the crisis, which relate, again, to corporate America and its resource extraction interests. And I think it's really irresponsible to consider the Venezuela crisis without considering the longstanding interests of American corporations and the way that they have found their expression, often in violence, particularly toward countries in Latin America.
Yeah, we've been decimating, and we've had our hand in decimating Latin America for what, 30 years?
Longer than that, even. You know, I mean, going back, I mean, the coup in Guatemala, I think, was in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, we're talking about 70 years at this point. Our entire foreign policy since the end of the Second World War has been more about extracting resources from countries around the world than it has about promoting democracy. And we should see the latest maneuvering as reflecting continuity in that aim.
One thing we've seen is, and I agree with everything, and I appreciate you laying it down, giving some historic context to that. I was on RT America yesterday, and we were talking about fake news, and we're talking about the journalism taking a deep dive, like totally not doing its job, promoting fake news in a number of stories from The Guardian, New York Times, latest stories about Donald Trump, just basically putting stuff out the air. But Holly, we were talking also about the Democratic candidates. There's only two candidates that I've seen who have spoken about Venezuela on the Democratic side. Bernie Sanders talked about it. It wasn't that impressive. I'll be honest and keep it 100. And then Tulsi Gabbard had a very short comment about it. What do you think happens when both the Republicans and the Democrats are, you know, holding hands and skipping down the road of war? Like they both seem to be cool with it. What do you think?
I mean, this is why, you know, I think moving on for the 2020, we do have to open up third and fourth parties. And because of the fact that the Democrats and Republicans have merged, I mean, essentially merged into one party, you know, I mean, we have to get more, you know, open-minded. I just think when it's just that, you know, 50-50 chance, it's like, okay, I'll just pick this and pick that. But once you start doing third or fourth, like, you know, other countries, like, you know, Italy, they would have 5 different parties. I mean, we have more of a choice, and I think people will be more, will actually be forced to do more research, because they just can't do, you know, A and B. But I think right now, with the Republicans and the Democrats, war, it's the same thing, but different agenda, it seems like, you know, to me. So I just think war altogether, it shouldn't be happening in 2019. I mean, we should be more civilized. We should be able to, you know, come in common ground to anything right now. I mean, we have this technology to do all these things, but we're still in our Neanderthal mindset that we can't, you know, come together on an agreement for, you know, both sides of humanity.
Absolutely. I agree with you as well. And I want to share with folks the Tulsi Gabbard statement about it. The United States needs to stay out of Venezuela. Let this Venezuelan people determine their future. We don't want other countries to choose our leaders, so we have to stop trying to choose theirs. So very rocket science type language, right?
It's so straightforward. I mean, you hear voices across the political continuum that are concerned about foreign influence in the United States, right? Whether that's Russian hacking in the election, whether that's, what have you. And yet we have absolutely no compunction at all about interfering in other states. And I think there is a really important principle that Representative Gabbard is seizing on. Other voices that have come out about this, he's not running for the presidency, but Representative Ro Khanna, who represents San Jose in California, has also been very outspoken about the illegitimacy of the war drums that are being beaten. Whether it's through a coup or whether it's through an invasion, we should recognize the commonality of regime change as an interest here. And we should have learned this lesson in Iraq, if not in Vietnam. But at the end of the day, we can't just dictate outcomes abroad, and particularly when it's corporations calling the shots and opportunistically claiming values like human rights that are more, quite frankly, implicated in other theaters where those same voices are conspicuously silent. We should all be much more skeptical of the claims for regime change in Venezuela. I'm very eager to see human rights vindicated, hopefully by the coup being resisted and the legitimate government there being able to maintain itself. I don't want to paint a rosy picture here. There are legitimate problems in Venezuela. Right. But it's a much more complicated picture than the one we're getting in the United States. And the idea that regime change by backing a coup is going to solve it is, quite frankly, it would be a joke if it had any humor in it at all.
Man, I want to thank you for mentioning that it's not perfect in Venezuela. I saw a tweet from Bernie Sanders, which actually, man, gave me some trepidation because it sounded like he was kind of agreeing with making some changes or being a part of that. Because he was bringing up some of the issues that you point out. But still, in the back of my head, I was thinking, but that's not our job to like, you don't want somebody going to your house and choosing who should wash the dishes or who, what's our business? Not our business, Shahid. Right. It's not our business at all. You know what I'm saying? So what do you think, Shahid? Let's just bounce back and forth, man. I don't know.
It's not our business. And at the end of the day, what we're pressing on here is a paradigm. And it's a paradigm shift, or there could be a shift, that is. You mentioned before the people who voted for Trump, perhaps as a protest against corporate centrism of the sort that Hillary represented. And part of what we're witnessing at the moment is the failure of that attempted shift. Trump promised to conduct government differently. And we're seeing, particularly in his attitude toward Venezuela, the continuity that trumps the change that he promised. Now, I want to contrast that, if I can, with the announcement about Syria and Afghanistan, where he's publicly claimed the interest to withdraw U.S. forces. And there's a really interesting contrast between these kinds of events. When trying to pull out of Syria and Afghanistan, let's just presume for the moment that he's actually going to do it, because I think there's a whole question as to how sincere that is. But you had a lot of Democrats coming out against that move, saying that a continued U.S. military involvement in those countries is somehow promoting U.S. interests, when nothing could be further from the truth. Any time our military is occupying a foreign country, we're not helping. We did it in the Second World War. It was true then. It has not been true at any point in the 70 years since. And at the same time, then, to see with Venezuela, the parties coming together to promote Trump's line, it's particularly disturbing. With respect to Bernie's statement, despite being a stalwart fan and supporter of Bernie Sanders in his 2016 race, and I hope to see him declare his candidacy for 2020, foreign policy has never been his particular strength, right? I mean, what has made people so enthusiastic about his candidacy and his policy proposals has been their domestic emphasis on supporting the needs of working people that the corporate parties are all too willing to run roughshod over. And I think if we apply that same lens internationally, the people of Venezuela are not being favored by the U.S. policy here. What is being favored by the U.S. policy here are the interests of the corporations that want the oil underneath Venezuela's soil. And I think that's something we should all be very alarmed about. And I'll just shut up after this. The thing we should be most alarmed about is the use of either our military or our diplomatic strength to facilitate corporate resource extraction. That is the thread that connects the last 70 years of U.S. policy, and that's the thread that we need to cut for climate justice reasons, if not for out of concern for our own rights and liberties here in the U.S.
And look, you can talk as much as you want. Somebody will jump in if they have something to say, because we're about to just bounce around. To your point, there are probably some people watching who are thinking, so what, guys? This is Venezuela. What are we worried about? Well, worry about it like this. Initially, so after the United States went on the line and said, hey, guys, we choose this guy as your president. We like him. We don't like Maduro. Maduro said, well, you know what, America? Get out of our country then. You got 72 hours or whatever. And Trump told our diplomats to stay anyway. Don't listen to him. He doesn't matter. He doesn't exist. So this could get ugly real fast if Maduro decides, well, we got some diplomats, maybe, I don't know, maybe some of them could hit their head on the way out of the country. What do you think about that, Holly? I mean, it could happen. I mean, you pushing a guy, you back somebody into a corner, we expect them to do at that point.
I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying. And you know what's so funny? The funniest thing to me is the regime change. Let's have regime change. What's that going to do? I mean, we could change the regime 1,000 times. I mean, but whoever's operating it is the issue here. I mean, at the end of the day, am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, well, how is that going to change?
I keep thinking, is there something about the currency? What's the currency structure in Venezuela? I don't know. What are they on? They're on the euro dollar or the petrodollar? Or what do they use? I know we formulated a plan against Gaddafi because he wanted to switch currency. What's up, Robbie or anybody? Anyone know?
They were about to drop the petrodollar, I believe. But I mean, back to Shahid's point about the resource extraction angle of it. I mean, I don't think most people even realize that Venezuela at this point has the largest oil reserves in the world, in the entire world. I mean, so that's definitely playing a huge role here. And what I also find interesting about this whole situation is, once again, it is another country that has had an adversarial position towards the United States for a long time. They have been openly hostile towards U.S. imperialism. Even Hugo Chavez before Maduro was extremely openly adversarial towards the Bush administration. I mean, I think he even said something like he smelled sulfur when he met Bush at the UN. So he would say, so they've always had, if you read some of Hugo Chavez's quotes, especially about the Bush era, it's some of the most hardcore sort of anti-imperialism stuff you'll hear. So I think that that's definitely playing a role as well, because, like Julian Assange has said about his own opponents, I think that the U.S. never forgives and never forgets when certain countries, another one being a good example is Iran, after the Iranian Revolution, they don't forget that embassy incident. And I think that plays a role in these intelligence communities. There's people who are grandfathered in, who have been there for, decades, who remember that era, and they hold a grudge against countries like Venezuela and Iran, even just from a hubristic American imperialism, kind of point of view.
Yeah, how dare you challenge us? How dare you speak when that's spoken to? How dare you speak back? How dare you taunt us? Right, that type of thing, Robbie.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think that's and it definitely plays a smaller role than the whole resource extraction angle, because that has a huge corporate, a force behind it as well. But I think that plays somewhat of a role too when it comes to Venezuela.
I totally agree for what it's worth. And I would say that whether it's the corporate resource extraction angle or the national security establishment, paying back debts, another word we might use that unites each of those independent strands to describe what we're witnessing today is colonialism. We are witnessing neo-colonialism effectuated through means other than the ones, of the model that lasted for half a millennium. This isn't mercantilism of the same sort. But it's not far removed when you have diplomacy that is serving the interests of corporations. Particularly in trying to foment regime change abroad, that's straight out of the colonial playbook, and I think we should recognize it as such.
Man,
Totally.
when you brought up the largest oil reserves in the world, I guess we could have just stopped there. I mean, they got the money bag. Got to get that bag, right, Holly?
Yep.
That's what they're here for. They're in there to get a piece of that. I mean, if we've seen before in Afghanistan and Iran, at one point when they were the largest oil, had the largest oil reserves, and all of a sudden America's there, and all of a sudden they don't have it anymore. Now we're in Venezuela now, and now we're trying to overtake them. I mean, this is becoming a pattern. I mean, America, nothing new under the sun, as they say. I mean, it's the same thing over again, just different regimes.
Yeah. And now that I'm getting this education on the issue, it looks like it's been going on all this time. We just, I guess the regime change is, brought it to light for more people. But I remember a couple years ago interviewing people in D.C., just randomly walking to people, talking to them about issues. And I had students from Venezuela who were telling me this, telling me what's been going on. And even some of them look paranoid, even having a conversation on camera. These brothers are working, man. How y'all doing? Y'all doing good, man. What's on your mind today? What's the issue? Is it Russia or is it food?
Nah, it's Venezuela, man.
Venezuela, that's what's up. That's what's up, man. It's a lot of drama, man. Could you fill us in what you think about it?
About Venezuela?
Yeah, about Venezuela.
Sure, I'm from Venezuela. Currently, my country's fucked, and the U.S. put some sanctions against Venezuela because of the referendum they had this weekend where they made up a bunch of illegal votes. The problem is Venezuela can't do much in terms of putting sanctions against Venezuela, because if they put something like an oil sanction, then Venezuela's economy crashes even worse than it is, and then they don't have cash. So oil makes up 95% of their cash currency. The moment that goes away, people don't get food.
Well, look, partner. So, is there a solution to the issue? What can Venezuela do?
There is no solution.
We just have to get out. You just have to get out your business, that type of thing.
Get Maduro out of there, and then we can make some progress slowly, in my opinion.
Well, look, man. Thank you for taking time, man.
Mario,
nice to meet you,
pleasure.
man. Chop it up.